Going into university, I thought I wanted to be a product developer, but after I'm doing it, I don't really know if I want to do that. I know I like research, and I'm just doing what I like right now. I'm not really worried about 5 years down the line. Mind you, I think about it, and I do try to put the things in place. I just think that people put so much stress on themselves with these grades, and I do think that they are, of course, important, but think about your options. And then, again, you don't need a 90. You don't. And if you're not planning, and for most people, going to graduate school is a very small fraction. To be honest, I'm not choosing it because I think it's going to get me farther in the industry. I'm actually not. I'm actually doing it because I just enjoy it. I enjoy it right now in this process. And most people aren't going to choose graduate school, and that's fine. So if you think that that's going to be your option, you don't need to get perfect grades. Hello everyone, the FoodGrads podcast is back. I hope you all had a great winter break and used the time to relax and reset. I know I sure needed it. But here we are, and we're full of a new, exciting year full of great conversations with all areas of people in the food industry. If you're new to the podcast, hello and welcome. This is the FoodGrads podcast, the podcast where we explore the fascinating career paths of people in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. You might have already noticed that was my voice at the beginning of this episode, and that is no mistake. To start off this new year, we have a podcast where I'm being interviewed. Yes, I thought that this would be a great time to do so because when listening to podcasts, I like to learn more about the host, so here it is. Here's my story. But this isn't a monologue because I am being interviewed by Anjali Patel, a new contributing blog author with FoodGrads, and she already has some blog posts on there, so stay tuned for more of her on this podcast as well on blog. In this episode, Anjali sat down to ask me questions about my journey in the food industry from high school to now and why I decided to go to graduate school after working in the industry for a year. We also dive into my program a little bit more, and we get to understand why I'm not in a food degree program despite my very extensive involvement with it. So enough with that intro, let's get into the show.
Well, here we are. Today, there's something a little different that's going to happen on the FoodGrads podcast. We are here to actually get to know a little bit more about our host, Veronica. And you must be wondering who's speaking at the other end. Well, I am Anjali Patel. I am a new contributing writer at FoodGrads. And this podcast is actually all about Veronica and her journey. So how do you feel, Veronica, being on the other side of the podcast?
Oh, geez, it's been a while since I've even been on the podcast. I can see why people get nervous when I email them, but hopefully we can have a good conversation.
I'm actually quite excited because have only recently joined FoodGrads, and I feel this is like a really good platform to get to know more about you. We have exchanged only a couple of emails regarding work, so I'm actually quite excited to know a lot more about your journey. So let's talk a little bit about your story towards your graduate school. How did that happen? How did you get into your program and like that?
So I guess I could there's a short version and there's the long version, because we could start going all the way back to when I was in high school, and I think I'm going to start there because I don't think that I've shared that journey. I've kind of put bits and pieces throughout the podcast episodes. My journey probably starts with when I was in high school. So I actually wanted to be a baker when I first was in high school, and that was like my set goal and all that. And I don't really know how the story morphed to me wanting to go into university, but I like food and I like science, so let's go into food science. That was literally my thing. I didn't have this set thing, but I was always interested in the President's Choice and their insider reports, and they had these things that they would come out. So the PC insider reports, I don't think they do them they only do it digitally, but they used to have a booklet that came every Christmas time, and they would put it in the newspaper, and it would have all the new products, and it was so exciting to see all these new exciting things that they were doing. And I just remember thinking that was so cool, and I was like, people make these things, they must be like food scientists or something. So I was like, okay, I'll go into that. That sounds really interesting. So I applied to different universities in the Greater Toronto area. So I applied to like Ryerson, Bresca, Western, anything that was, and University of Guelph, of course. But the thing is, I got waitlisted on everything except for Bresca, which was an all-female university, but I actually had chose not to go because I didn't want to move away from home because I just felt with my situation, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. Okay, I got waitlisted. I'll just put Ryerson chemistry in there because I have 2 extra spots. Let's do chemistry and bio. So I just literally threw those in. And circumstances led me to that was the only thing I got accepted into, despite having grades that were in the range. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to Ryerson. Sure, because it was the only one accepted me. And so going into Ryerson, I knew at least I wanted to do their co-op program, like, because I think about how important it was. And I know being in chemistry is such a general degree. So I got into the co-op program after making sure that my grades were good in university, and that's actually where I got my first internship, which was at Gailey Foods. And I worked in quality control, and they liked me so much, and I bothered their other departments so much that I stayed in their R&D department for my internship. So I stayed there for a year, and honestly, it was like one of the best experiences. And if you listen to Sonia's episode of the podcast, I'll talk about how my internship came from knowing a person. So my boyfriend's mother's boss's cousin worked at Gailey Foods.
Wow, that's quite a long set chain of communication. Wow.
Yeah, and for the longest time, I didn't even know that the person that I was talking to was not even in that chain of people. So it goes to show to make sure you tell everyone that you're looking for a co-op position, because honestly, you never know where your connections are going to go. Have a good relationship with your boyfriend's parents as well.
That's a good advice.
But so when I was at Gailey, I worked in their quality control department for my for their internship program. I was working in their butter plant, so I did a lot of the standardized testing, making sure like the quality parameters were set. So that involves like making sure that the butters were the correct weights, the packaging was on correctly, at receiving, that like things were of standards. So I was kind of like that extra help in that lab. If they had too much paperwork, I would help them file it. So it was a really good experience. I loved their department, but a lot of things with QC, R&D, they would funnel in some tests and all that. So that's how I started talking with actually 2 of the other students who were in Gailey Foods for their internship program for their R&D. So they actually went to the University of Guelph. These people that I still know now, they worked at Gailey Foods, and it was like a great experience. So I got to help with their pilot plant. So if one of the R&D technicians wanted to try a new cottage cheese product or try like a new sour cream or any of the projects that they're working on, I was down in the pilot plant making them, which was so much fun. Being that first stage, I mean, seeing the many reiterations and trying new flavors, and they really got me involved working with them. So I really felt that I knew what the R&D experience was from it. That experience was so valuable. So I stayed there for a year, and then when my co-op was up, I came back to school and I finished my degree, but I knew from there I wanted to go into the food industry. I knew like this was awesome, and at that same time, that's when I started getting involved with FoodGrads. And Nicole, as everyone knows, is such a lovely, amazing person. And
oh, she's awesome. She's awesome.
I know.
Yeah.
She just gave me this opportunity to help her with FoodGrads. And I thought this was a perfect opportunity to figure out what I want, because I really like doing the chemistry at school. Working at Gailey Foods, I realized that there were so many opportunities that I could work that aren't just R&D. Like, there's marketing. That actually prompted me to get a minor in marketing, which in hindsight I might have not still done, but I think it was still a good experience because I realized how involved marketing was in working with R&D. With FoodGrads, I started writing blog posts. That was my primarily focus on the My Food Job Rocks podcast with Adam E. He let me write about flavors on this blog, which was super fun. I really started branching out and exploring. Now, in my 4th year of university, through my program, you can do an undergraduate thesis. So under the supervision of Dr. Russo, which is my actual supervisor now, I did a project on the characterization of cocoa butters based on country of origin. So basically I looked at how does the fat crystallize of cocoa butters when they come from different countries? Because
I see.
Yeah, so most cocoa butters come from the Ivory Coast. I think it's 70% of it, but there's a lot of other regions that also produce it, and that's where we see that single source cocoa chocolate bars in the supermarket. You would be surprised at how different they taste.
Has it got to do with the geographical locations?
Yeah. Totally.
Makes sense, because there's something similar with coffee as well, that you've got this differences in different countries. And so I'm guessing it's on the same lines.
Totally. You know how different regions have different rainfalls, different sun, how much sun, temperatures. Different regions also, they ferment their beans in different ways. Some put bamboo over top of it. They have all their different methods.
So how many countries did you compare in this?
5. I did Ivory Coast, Mexico, Colombia, and the other 2 elude me right now. But it was really fun. I really liked it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Sounds like a fun project.
It was, and it was like a dream come true to me as well, because at Ryerson, I never took a single food-related course because it never worked in my courses, because Ryerson used to have a food science course. Well, they used to have a food science course in the chemistry department, because they have a food science department that does food science.
Right.
But the chemistry, they didn't have one, and it hadn't been in effect for like 20 years or something. Doing my undergraduate thesis in the food lab was a dream come true to me. I was finally doing something food related. So,
but then I'm just wondering, could you take electives from the food science courses, or did you have that opportunity?
I tried. The things were not in my favor. It overlapped with one of my core courses that I just couldn't move. They allowed me to, but then the time slot. So, alas, I went through all 4 years without a single food science course.
Oh, wow. But then you're in the food science world, so it doesn't really matter what you end up studying, you know?
Exactly.
But I just want to drive back a little bit, and I was just curious about your high school, because I do know that food science is something that's not rightly promoted in high school. Mm-hmm. I feel that when I was in my high school, I could barely think of a future in food science. I mean, I didn't even have that thought in my head, because everybody in school just talks about engineering, medical, those mainstream courses that we always talk about. So do you also feel that you had the same journey? I relate to your journey quite a bit, because even my bachelor's is in chemistry. Mm-hmm. And I dived right into it because honestly, my entire thing to dive into it was that it was just one of my favorite subjects, and I did really well at it in school. So for me, it was, this is the obvious choice. I'm going to figure out when time goes by what I want to do basically with my chemistry degree. So I'm just wondering, did you feel the same, that if you would have been helped by your teachers or the school program to know a little bit more about the food science degree right during your high school, you could have planned your journey towards food sciences much better?
For me personally, I feel like my experience is different. So on the first fold, no, I don't think that food science was promoted whatsoever in my I don't actually remember a single conversation relating to it. Again, coming back to being someone I liked science, and I was at one point I thought, I'll study, I wanted to go into neuroscience, and at one point I wanted to be a funeral director or a cake decorator. I'm not joking. These were things I genuinely was considering in my 4th year. And that was one of the things that I kind of didn't like about, at least with Ontario high schools, is that the cooking courses were, or hospitality, they're college bound. So at our school, they'd have applied, or I don't even remember the terms, but it's basically college or university directive. And once you hit your grade 10 or grade 11, you have to divert if you're going to choose to university or college. I applied for colleges for their cooking programs, and I got accepted into all of them. But then the window to accept college applications is earlier than the university. So if you don't accept college, you have to go to the university. But I know I'm going on a tangent. Definitely no, my high school didn't promote it at all. But again, I applied to university food science programs, and what didn't let me get in was my grades. So it wasn't me not wanting to choose those. It's just my grades weren't bad. High 70s, low 80s. It wasn't 90s. I didn't plan on going to medical school or those high programs, so Ryerson took me.
Yeah, I was just curious, because I do feel that if schools start promoting this industry more, we can have so many more people joining it.
Totally.
Okay, let's move a little bit forward. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your non-food science program at Ryerson University now? Because I do understand what you're pursuing now has sort of nothing to do with food industry in the bigger sense of it.
Yeah. So you are right. So once I graduated, I actually did work in the quality assurance for a year, and I just felt it wasn't, I kept thinking about my research. When I graduated, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a master's or not, so I was like, So I went and worked for a year, and I figured if I wanted to work, I'd keep working. But the environment wasn't just, I just kept thinking about, I want to do a degree. Like, I just really missed it. So I loved my experience in my lab with Dr. Russo, as well as my other lab mates. It was such an amazing experience with them. And I just basically emailed him up and I was like, hey, I want to do a master's degree. Do you have any room in your lab? Yeah, sure. Apply by this date and we'll get you set up. Now, the thing with Ryerson is, I know your question is, I'm actually, as many of you have heard with the podcast, I always introduce it with, I'm in the molecular science program, and people are like, oh, that's not food science, but it really isn't. And honestly, the reason I chose this program is because of my supervisor and his research. Dr. Russo is very well known in the fat crystallization space as well as the chocolate industry. So I knew going into, if I'm doing research, well, my focus is going to be doing my research. It's not going to be doing courses, because at Ryerson, in our molecular science program, during your master's degree, you only have to take 3 courses. So it's not like a course-based thing, because they really want you heavily to focus on your thesis. So I knew I would just be focused on my thesis. And even though my degree name is molecular science, at Ryerson, that encompasses everything from biology to environmental science to, there's some students that are studying cannabis ecology. It's everything. Basically, it's just science. If you're in a science thing, it's at Ryerson. And so it's a really small program, but I think that's their strength, is because I do these seminar courses every week. So Monday and Tuesday, we listen to all the other students in our course and they present their stuff. And I think that you get a better range of topics and you see how they can apply to you, and you become more of a diverse student, because I think that sometimes if you focus too heavily on a subject, you can get pigeonholed into it and you get too ultra specific, and it might blind you to the outside worlds of research. And Ryerson is very collaborative, where a lot of our departments work with each other, and that's another unique thing I love about them, is that it's not competitive. It doesn't feel like, oh my God, I gotta hide my data from this other group in the other side of the hall, because no, it's like, you need some help with the data science, you go to the other lab. There's just so many people you can work with. And that's why I ultimately decided to stay at Ryerson and do molecular science, because I like the environment. My lab group is amazing. I can talk to them. There's so many experiences. We have people from all over the world in our lab. We have people from different experiences. I just chose molecular science. I don't really like the name, but I get to spend so much time focused on my research that I don't even feel that it's a bad thing.
Yeah, wow, because your program sounds so different from the one that I've been through. And it's exciting to know that it's really just focused on research and not so much on courses. Mm-hmm. That's brilliant, because that gives you like a lot of clarity if you are the kind of person interested in that journey. Well, with you I feel you were much more clearer way before you took on this role, that, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. You knew the supervisors. But I'm just wondering, like, for people who are like trying to figure their path into the food industry, mm-hmm. Just from a perspective of a student, would you recommend them going down the path you've gone through, or like would you tell them to have like a more fixated path towards the food industry, with the courses in food, with the program in food, like, if you had to like think of another scenario?
Yeah, no, I know with a lot of people I know people who have only done food science. They've only gone to Food Science University. They've only done a master's degree in food science. But I think with both perspectives, you have to just go with what you're going to like in the moment, as well as what works for you. I chose Ryerson because it was close to home. At the end of the day, I could have gone to that university that did food science, but I didn't. And I think it's really about making the experience yours. I specifically knew if I wanted to go in the food industry, I at least need to do some co-op positions in it. I really made sure at least I was tailoring my degree to it. I think both have their benefits. I do sometimes now regret that I never did learn the food science, because I didn't have any background in food specific. I knew about interfacial tension, metallic chemistry, and those concepts do apply to food in a general sense, but it wasn't specific. And I'd like to think that my experiences have helped me, that I have a better range, and because of this, I feel I know way more about the industry that I think than even someone in a food science program does. And that's just because I worked with FoodGrads, because I don't know about this industry, so I spent a lot of extra time. So I think it really comes down to how directed you are as a person. So even though I'm a general person with everything I've done, I specifically knew I wanted to still go in the food industry, and I took the time and did it myself to learn about these experiences. Had I maybe been in a food science program, maybe I would have thought that my degree was enough to get me in the industry and I wouldn't have helped with FoodGrads. I don't know. And it does work for some people. I don't know. But I just knew that I had to define myself if I was going to go in this industry.
I see. Well, I think now is the perfect time to talk a little bit about your research, because I'm curious how these two things, there's two different worlds, have come together in your world. So tell us a little bit more about what you work on and what is it that you like about it.
Even though I did the cocoa butter research in undergraduate degree, I'm actually studying emulsions right now. And more specifically, I'm studying water and oil emulsions. So going back to what emulsions are, just to recap to remind everyone, when we think of something like an oil and water, right, we know that the two of them don't mix. But if we like shook them up really crazy like in a salad dressing, we could make them mix temporarily. So that is an emulsion, but we know that it doesn't last very long. So what you do is you usually add an emulsifier, or we call it a surfactant, mustard or eggs, or there's a lot of surfactants used in the baking industry like monoglycerides and all that, but I digress. So we have that 3-factor system, and by adding this third thing, we can create emulsions. So salad dressing, butters, margarines, we have all these different types of emulsions. So my research is really focused on understanding the fundamentals of emulsions. So more generally, oil and water emulsions are much more studied. But with water and oil emulsions, there's not as much research. So things like vitamins delivered in a water, in a pill, an oil pill, that is an application of it. So more specifically, I'm studying water and oil emulsions stabilized by fat crystals, which is a very similar system to margarine. So what I'm trying to do is see if we can add lots of water into the system. Can we make it have the same texture as if it had no water in the system? For example, a low-fat margarine compared to a high-fat margarine. The low-fat one has more water in it. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to study that other word that I was using, the emulsifiers. How does that play a role in changing the texture? And I'm really fundamentally trying to understand, how is that emulsifier working? How is it affecting the texture? And could I change the processing conditions to make it be a thin mixture, a thick mixture, and then trying to understand if we add external forces to our, let's say, margarine, breading butter, how does it respond to those changes? I'm really trying to understand that fundamental research.
I see. That makes sense. If you had to talk about the bigger picture of this outcome, maybe it would be nice to talk about products where you could see the result of this. So Can you talk a little bit about that?
So actually with my research, it actually is kind of already out there on the market. Like I said, going back to the margarine, you can go to the grocery store.
Low fat options,
so you can already go to the grocery store and find that. But on a fundamental level, we don't really understand what's going on.
The mechanism, basically.
Yeah, the why. That's something I like about my research is even though it's applicable to industry, there's a lot of stuff out there that we know works, maybe baking breads and all that. On the fundamental level, there's just not enough research. So we're hoping that if we can fundamentally understand what's going on, maybe we can better predict emulsifiers that can be used in the market to do the same thing that are maybe cleaner label and all that. Because I'm using PGR right now, which is primarily like already used in chocolate bars as an emulsifier. So there's a lot of researching going in that. It is fundamental research that I really enjoy.
That sounds like a really fun environment to work in. I was just wondering, are you thinking of continuing and doing a PhD within the same area?
Okay.
Or am I just poking holes too far into the future?
No, it depends. I don't know if this podcast world, do I admit that I made the decision last week that I'm going to try to go into the transfer exam. So at Ryerson, again, we have a program where you can actually convert your master's degree into a PhD. So what would happen is if you got accepted with your proposal, you would just omit a master's degree and you're already officially in the PhD.
I see.
So
Wow.
I'm putting in my documentation and all my arguments and all that fun stuff, and I'm gonna try for it. So hopefully, podcast world, if you're listening to this in like 2 years from now, you'll be like, she's getting her PhD.
And I'm glad I'm the one poking those holes. I can be like, I saw that coming.
I really hope I get it. It's gonna be a lot of work.
2020 has been hard on all of us. Yeah, I don't even want to get into those details. I'm glad it's ending. I mean, there have been some good parts, but majority of it has been quite hard for most of us. So I was just thinking, has this affected your journey? Has it affected your research, and how?
Yeah, totally. It would be foolish to say it that it didn't. So I live in Ryerson University is located in Toronto. So Toronto for Ontario is the red zone. So I can't say to what other provinces were doing at the time, but when the lockdown had started to happen, so we were at a very extreme lockdown back in April, I believe it was. Everything's starting to blur together. So our university was closed, basically. I couldn't even go in the lab for 2 months. At least. I can't even remember now because, again, everything's blurry. It was 2 or 3 months. I wasn't even allowed to go into the lab, which was very frustrating when I had actually finished all my courses and tried to plan for the full summer. I'd just be in the lab every day. That was my plan. I already done my courses, so I basically, for the beginning part, didn't know what the heck I was supposed to do because I had no results to even analyze at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, like
that must be hard.
Because making these emulsions have been really difficult. Like I'm still doing it, and I'm still trying to do it for like over a year, which is in its own self like really hard. So going into this lockdown, I didn't really have a paper I could write. I didn't have research. What I did was I really tried to use the opportunity to just learn going through scientific journals, and I've been working on making a draft for like a review paper, which is just taking tons of different journals and trying to see if I can see any trends, bring it together. Like those are the important ones. And that's all I did for a long time. It wasn't until August that I was able to go back on a modified schedule. And because I have different people in the lab, we're a fairly kind of larger lab. We actually were beneficial in the building that we're in is not within the university. It's a separate building. So we were able to have access, and it was a much newer building that was well redesigned. And so we were allowed to go back, but we started to go on a schedule. And now that I'm back in the lab, we can only have a certain number of people. We have high cleaning regimes, and it really slowed a lot of things down because I thought that I would have had my project, because when you do your thesis you usually have little smaller projects you complete throughout. The project that I'm working on now probably would have been done 4 months ago, probably, I would think.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a delay.
Yeah, and I mean there's nothing I could do about it. So I just focused on writing. So I am lucky that I'm back in the lab. I mean, with the time that we're in now, we are in lockdown in Toronto, but because research is deemed essential, I still go in, but at a modified schedule.
Yeah, that sounds a bit dicey because I do remember the program that I did was quite different. Like we had 6 months to finish our thesis, and that was it.
Oh my God.
So, yeah. Had I gone through what you're going through, I think I would have been crying my heart out because I was an international student. I've got the tuition fee that's 10x. And extending means more of that. So I know exactly what you're going through. Plus, I do feel that with our research, it's never, okay, I've got plan ABC, and that's exactly how it's going to work.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, that's what I'm going through right now. It's everything is based off of, okay, well, this week I'll get this done, and then next week I'll get that done, but then it's 4 weeks later, I haven't done A.
Yeah. But, I do know that now that I'm done with it, I know that even our professors know, and everybody in food science knows that 6 months or like putting a tight limit to your work does not really function in food sciences. So even then, I do feel that your program is quite accommodative.
With my experience as well, a lot of students were granted extra time. And they actually, some people actually got financial help that they could get the extra semester waived. So
yeah, because I worked with microbiology, and imagine getting a break in that, because you've got your plates and you've got so if you lose time, that's it. Maybe you've worked on the culture for 2 weeks and then it's gone. You can't do much about it. So well, I'm glad to know that the program is accommodative, because that's important. I really want to know, you're doing so much, because you're like, I just learned in this conversation that you're also a teaching assistant and you're writing for FoodGrads and you're doing your thesis. How are you like handling so much on a plate?
No social life. No, I kid. No. That's not true.
No,
I swear.
Let's break that stereotype, because I feel a lot of people do feel that students or like people from the food industry or from any scientific industry don't have like a social life, and that's so not true. So like okay, so I haven't been writing as much now, so that was one of the things I've been doing the podcast instead. And I think it's about knowing what you're doing. I'm very heavily into journaling. I believe that journaling gives me a lot of mental clarity. It gives me a lot of structure. It helps me figure out what I like and what I don't like. And I think that knowing your deadlines. So I go back to, I use also a program called Notion, which I won't get into in this podcast, but if you guys are like Notion freaks, like hit me up. I totally want to talk about it. But it's an online software that you can kind of do what you want. But with everything, I think that sleep is so important. I know that's so cliche, but I've been really much a person to make sure I have a good bedtime, structured bedtime. I also get up early as well. So I also make sure not to dally with my time. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does. I wake up at 5:30 and I go to school for 6:30 in the morning. That's what works for me. I found what worked. I don't do well in the afternoon. I don't stay up late. I don't do things when I'm not productive, because I don't think it's waste time. Staying organized, I think it's a matter of knowing your explicit deadlines, having a good relationship with the people, be very communicative with things when you know you're not going to get something done. Something I still need to work on. I'm not the best with that. I know that sometimes life gets in the way, but I also rely heavily on my family members as well as my boyfriend. I mean, I've been together with him for so long that he is my family at this point, but I think that you should really lean on your relationships to give you strength with a lot of things. Make sure to communicate. And I think that if you communicate things out, I know that I'm getting away from like organization and time management, but I feel like if you're a happier person, that's what actually makes you more productive. So putting their time in relationships and like journaling out thoughts and having more mental clarity, I think those are the things that let you do more. And they sound so counterintuitive, but like taking care of your body, like exercising, talking with people, by having a light mind, I feel like that's when you really can start doing your good productive thinking work. Because if you don't try to take too much time into your like failures, it's something I'm definitely still working at, but being really reflective of yourself. And I think that once you know what you want, I think that's a key. If you know what you want to do, you spend less time doing what you don't need to do. And I always believe that relationships are the things that get you more organized with your time. And I also like use my family structure. I still live at home with my parents, and I spend a lot of time with them. That's my social life in that. And I really try to condense my time. When I leave school, I know I have to do some things at home, but I really try to time block it out. After 7, that's really my family time. And I find that if you have those blocks that you know you're going to look forward to, or like going on a date, well, dates, like maybe not going out on a date, but maybe staying in for a date. Yeah, those definitions have changed this year. So yeah.
When you start to structure your time around the people around you, I think that's when you start to do your more meaningful work and your more productive work. I know it's not
that makes so much sense.
I don't think it's a straight up answer, but I really think that I put my relationships first, even with everyone. As a TA, I put my students, think about them, and I think about their relationships. And I think that if you start putting what you put in with everything outside of what you actually have to do, it starts to give you clarity and the focus to work when you're actually supposed to work and not go on YouTube for 4 hours. I'm not going to say I don't go on YouTube more than I probably should, but yeah, just making use of your time in the time. Don't half do things. Don't half watch YouTube while you're doing your studying for your exam. Don't do that. That doesn't save anyone time.
Yeah, but I do identify with the fact that a good work life is supported by good relationships, because the minute you lose that support, I feel you don't feel motivated to do anything. I mean, even watching YouTube won't make sense then, because you're like so digressed and diverted about that whole thing that is not working out rather than the things that are working out. Everybody has that time in their life where they question things, but once you start prioritizing the things right, they eventually make much more sense. And then you get a structure to your life, which doesn't really feel like a structure because you are enjoying every day that comes to you, because it's going to be different and it's still going to be fun. Makes a lot of sense, actually. So yeah, we are not boring. Science people are really fun, guys.
Yeah, totally. I mean, okay,
yeah, I can talk about Netflix shows and stuff like that, you know? It's just that we enjoy a certain different tangent to life. And I feel that's a beautiful tangent because we learned so much more about life, even when we're just doing something scientific. Patience, for example. Yeah, that's a lesson that science teaches you like nothing else does.
Patience. Scientists are patient. You don't think that we are, but trust me, if you've been doing the same thing for a year, you're kind of forced to become patient.
Well, I was just wondering, it would be really nice to talk a little bit about your application process, because I know that a lot of students this year, especially after being affected with COVID, they might not even have the right kind of motivation to put their application down on paper. But like, if you had to give like this one advice to write like an amazing application, even making your journey beautiful, to put that beautiful journey on paper, what do you suggest how to go about it?
Okay, so with Ryerson, again, I might not be the best person to ask for this advice because with my application process, you don't get accepted into the program unless the supervisor takes you. So you actually have to get a supervisor's approval before you even go into the program or even apply for the program. So for me, I just made the decision. Honestly, I just did it. I didn't spend grueling hours for weeks on end doing an application. I really just hit up my supervisor. I made sure that I had good relationships prior. I said, hey, I want to be in your lab. And he's like, okay. And I made sure I had my grades going out of university. Like, I mean, that's a hindsight thing. With your application, I think it's always good to have options open. With my university, you can graduate with low grades and still get your degree. And I think for some people, that is a very valid choice to do if you want to go into the industry. Grades don't show up in your resumes. They don't.
Yeah.
And I don't think that if you decide that you're not the person, don't be so caught up in grades. They're not always the important thing. But like in my case, I knew I kind of wanted to maybe do a master's. So I made sure that my grades were still up there. I put up the thing. But with the application process, honestly, just make sure that you're planning ahead of time. Or not even just planning, just like have the things set up in ahead. I know that's not explicit to, well, I'm applying now. I didn't do it. But if you're listening and you're maybe thinking about it 4 years down the line, why not make your life a little easier and just put little steps here and there? Write a blog every week. I know that's, again, not graduate thing, but make sure that you have the grades. And I just think it's about hindsight, thinking about your future. You don't have to set yourself, like, I don't know what I'm going to do in 5 years. I honestly don't. But I just make sure to have the seeds here that should I want to pick that plant later on, it's there.
Yeah, and I do agree with you because times have changed so much. When I was applying 5 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about the array of things you could do to make your application stand out, you know. People want to put in that extra effort, show the jazz behind their lives. Grades matter to go to a good school, and that's the honest reality. So I think a balance of both makes sense, like presenting a fuller picture of your life along with decent grades. I wouldn't say just log yourself into it, but
Totally.
A good balance is what is appreciated.
I would always tried my best and all that. In university, I knew going into the master's degree program, I didn't need a 90. So I'm not going to try to get grades to get perfect. You don't need perfect grades. With Ryerson, an A is anything 90 and above. A minus is 80 to 85, something like that. So there's 20% range I could play around with. I don't think grades are everything. I don't. You don't have to know your path. Going into university, I thought I wanted to be a product developer, but after I'm doing it, I don't really know if I want to do that. I know I like research, and I'm just doing what I like right now. I'm not really worried about 5 years down the line. Mind you, I think about it and I do try to put the things in place. I just think that people put so much stress on themselves with these grades, and I do think that they are, of course, important, but think about your options. And then, again, you don't need a 90. You don't. And if you're not planning, and for most people, going to graduate school is a very small fraction. To be honest, I'm not choosing it because I think it's going to get me farther in the industry. I'm actually not. I'm actually doing it because I just enjoy it. I enjoy it right now in this process. And most people aren't going to choose graduate school, and that's fine. So if you think that that's going to be your option, you don't need to get perfect grades. Like, if you're not going to graduate school, you really don't need to get past the course. But I'm not saying don't learn the stuff. We could go on a whole another tangent about There's no structured path, basically. You can't have one path that's right for you, basically.
So
just think about maybe what you might want to do and just make sure you might have some options. And just make sure to explore, just learn about the world. I chose not to travel, but some people, traveling is learning about the world. Like you're in Canada, and I mean, you went to the Netherlands, and when I interview you, we're going to find out more about these journeys. But
it's a different journey for everybody. I do agree with that. I was thinking, we are so involved in the food industry. Do you have days where you feel like, oh, this is what I love about the food industry, this is what I don't appreciate, or this is what needs to get better?
I have experienced this in the past, and I'm not going to say the industry doesn't need to grow, and I don't want to pigeon myself into saying some bleak things, but with the food industry, I think that we need to acknowledge that it's not a dead-end job, and I think that we need to appreciate our workers that work in the lines, who work on the machines, and don't treat them as though these are jobs that are just, I failed in life and I'm going to go work at a manufacturing job. These jobs are tough. They are physically hard. They are sometimes very mentally learning how to use a machine, being able to change out the things and all that, and I want those things to go away, and I want people to appreciate and not think of them in this way. And I think that also the industry is very multicultural. I do truly believe that, and I don't think that that's promoted enough. And I do know certain reasons why it happens. I know a lot of people come from outside of Canada, talking to Canada, and they work in these factories for their jobs and all that, and that's where some people get them. But they're very multicultural areas, and I think that we should promote this. We should encourage this should be something that's more highlighted. I think that's so exciting, and I think that as well, we need to, as well in the industry, also promote more language learning. I do think that there are some workers that, I think that, coming back to this idea of communication, I think if we have more workers that, if maybe I can start to speak, and I've had in past experiences where we can both speak English, and I wish that I could speak in someone else's native tongue. That's on me. I want to learn about how to speak in their native tongue, because I think that we could better build our communication, because sometimes things in the plant get a little too technical, even for the QA people. It's let's talk about GMPs. That's not really it's such a technical word. And I think that if we could encourage better communication with everyone, that we could promote these people. I think that the industry needs to really promote these beautiful people that are working and doing all these different roles. I think that we need to communicate better with one another, and I think that we should really celebrate one another more. And I don't think that that's happening enough, especially in the news and all that. And it comes back to my idea, when we think of product on the shelf, it's not humanized, it's villainized. The industry people are that box of cereal is just chemicals and all that, and it's not. It's not, and I want people to see that so much. That there's so many people, beautiful people, who work and put their hard effort into doing this. And there's been so much thought put into it. And I just want a more inclusive, more celebrated industry, because frankly, most of us aren't at home cooking from scratch every single day. And I refuse to believe anyone's flour is processed somehow. Your canned goods are processed. I want these people to be celebrated more. And I think that it needs to happen.
That's a brilliant insight into it, because I was also sort of going to throw some light into diversity and inclusion. So I do understand how important it is to have a work environment where you, of course, respect everybody, regardless the position they hold in the company, but also in multiple roles, you need this diversity to be included because...
Yeah. I think if anything, food's the thing that's going to bring everyone together. Everyone needs to eat.
Yeah, the way I look at the world, it's not going to be the same for you. And that's where change happens, because even this conversation that I've had with you right now, I've learned like 20 new things and something's changed in my brain, you know? And likewise, I'm sure you've heard a few things from me and you've been, okay, no, that's a different perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you have good recommendations for podcasts, for books, for people one should follow.
Okay, so I have a few things. I kind of jump all over with everything. For podcasts, I'm just going to like rapid list them. The Food Professor podcast, which is done by 2 professors in Canada. And I really like this one because it's about Canadians' food habits and it's coming from a researcher. So I really enjoyed that one. So I like their like perspectives on things, and they get a lot of good guests from bigger companies, which a little jealous. I got to get some big people on my podcast. Appreciate it.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Let's envision this for 2021.
Yeah. I got the OG, My Food Job Rocks, with Adam Yee, doing an amazing job. It's like 245 episodes. He's like the inspiration for this podcast. So
I thought so. I follow him and I thought so.
Yeah, totally. There's also the Gastropods podcast, which is science and food. Love that podcast. There's the BBC British Food Chain. That's a good one. It's British perspective, but I think that they talk about more nuanced topics that might not be explored in some other ones, which I really enjoy. I always encourage listening to other people's stories, like the Tim Ferriss podcast. It's really good to do it. If you're a student, I like the Emporium podcast. That's really good for students. In terms of books, I don't read as many food books as I used to. It's just my books now are now literary journals. If you want to learn about emulsions, I like Emulsion Principles, Practices, and something by McClements, which is like the OP person on emulsion science. But for actual books, I recommend The Third Plate, which is by Dan Barber. I don't know, he comes up with like what the ultimate food of the future plate would be, and it really dives into so many topics of that you wouldn't thought. He was thinking about like where he gets the grains, if it should be vegetarian, and then he starts to deal with food communities, places where like overfishing, why is it overfished, and he talks about the real people working there. It's a really insightful book. They have an audiobook version, so I highly recommend that one.
I just put that down. I'm so excited to check it out.
Yeah, so that would be my book recommendation. I really always think back to it. And for people to follow, check out the podcast and then check out the people who are actually in the like following them. Honestly, when you want to follow someone, if you're interested in any industry, go look for someone who's at a job that you want. Follow them on LinkedIn. Honestly, this is where I'm coming back with like plant the seeds. So if you know, for example, that this person is an R&D person who works at this company and they post on LinkedIn, comment on their stuff. They'll start to recognize your face. They'll start to see you. Don't come into it, you're trying to get a job, but maybe like try to follow their brain, see what like they're following, what they like. I think that's good. Of course, follow FoodGrads and Nicole because she's gonna like give you like the best content, and you'll always know when people like Anjali post new stuff and me in the podcast. But
woohoo! Shout out to all of us.
I don't really have any people that I particularly can think of that I follow. Honestly, just go on my LinkedIn and look at my connections, and then you'll see. I can't think.
Best advice. That's the best advice.
But if you are going to connect with anyone on FoodGrads, or I mean, even in LinkedIn in general, I'm just saying, like, shoot a message on your like invitation. I think get instantly. If someone looks for a follow, and I didn't respond, it might have been just because you didn't say anything. And I kind of want to build like an actual connection with people, because LinkedIn also has an option too where you can follow people but not actually be a connection. So if that's what you're worried about, you can follow someone and then build up that reservoir.
Build up that relationship. Yeah.
So
that's
I guess that's what I would do. That's everything I can list off. Anything will be on the show notes if anyone wants to see those things. So and if you have any like more things to talk about. There's also Darren Detweiler, which is a professor at Northeastern University. He's done a lot of stuff with FoodGrads as well, and he's really he had a podcast episode on the Adam E podcast, highly recommend, and he's really trying to change like the future of food safety. So I would probably say him if I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, so coming to that, where do people find you?
Anything FoodGrads related, if you reach out, it would probably end up getting to me somehow if you said I will Veronica.
Yeah, that's true.
But the easiest way to connect with me is through my email for FoodGrads. So that's veronica@foodgrads.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is Hislop Veronica. So HISLOP Veronica. That's Twitter. There's also LinkedIn. I'm Veronica Ann Hislop. Yeah, those would probably be the best places. I think if you also like message on the Instagram. Yes, I know I'm not the best with Instagram, everyone. It's a lot of work trying to do everything, but you can also find me there.
You're a hustler, so that's cool.
Ooh, never got that.
But yeah, I guess we've had a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed my time. I didn't really realize where time went by, and I think I've learned a lot about you within this 1 hour than we have learned about each other in the past 4 emails that we have shared about work.
Well, I would think so. And that's a great thing about a podcast is like, when do you ever sit down and talk to someone really genuinely for like an hour?
Yeah. And I feel like 2020 is the best time to like do this platform, because you want to meet people, but you cannot. But then this is the way out. And like, you can still make so many new friends, meet so many new people. So I feel it's brilliant. But yeah, I had a great time, and I hope you had a great time too, talking about your journey.
Of course I did. It was weird to talk about myself. I felt like I was rambling because normally I'm used to asking the other person. But I really hope that some people can find value in our conversation. And everyone, you got to watch out because I'm going to be going back to normal, and I'm going to be interviewing you sometime. So keep on the lookout for that. And yeah. That was episode 14 of the FoodGrads podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads website by clicking the podcast tab on the homepage. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, then please consider leaving a review on wherever you get your podcast. There's like a lot of them out there, so pick whichever one you want. We would really appreciate it. I also recommend that everyone go check out Anjali's blog posts on the FoodGrads blog. Anjali's done some posts on fortification and fermentation. They're great introduction reads, and they use scientific sources, so you know how I'm always about that. Stay tuned for the podcast in the future where I will be interviewing Anjali, and we'll get to know more about her. Anyways, that's it for this week's podcast. Thank you everyone so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye!